Hello and welcome, everybody. So, my name is Steven, and this is the show where we bring together experts to break down some of the most fundamental topics in HR. And I have these three amazing guests with me today to discuss our topic, which is employee suspensions. So, it's a little bit of a juicy one today. We're going to get into it and hopefully hear a lot of great insights on everything to do with employee suspensions. I'm going to go ahead and intro our three guests here. First of all, we have with us Chinwe Ebuta, who's Human Capital and Culture Lead at Houseba Smart Homes. We have Nicole Little, who is an HR business partner at Homespire Modeling Group. And we have Debbie Radish Respes, former VP of HR, and she's the current owner of a coaching/consulting business. So great group. Glad to have all three of you with us from all over. Let's talk about employee suspensions. And I want to actually jump in and start from afar and say, what do we do before we jump to a suspension? Right? Like, what leads up to that? What can we do to avoid suspending somebody? And Debbie, I'd love to throw this one to you first, and then Chinwe, if you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah. If it actually has gotten to that point, there's a lot of things that you can do beforehand. Is everyone trained? Does everyone know the rules? Just start with some basics. As HR leaders, one of the things that I always like to throw out there is check your own biases before you assume the worst or assume the best. It's easy to like someone more or less, which can skew the actual facts of the case. So before you actually make a decision, make sure that you've got the facts of the case. Just like an investigator, that's kind of what HR is, right? It's putting ourselves kind of on that back burner, understanding where we're coming from in order to be able to really get to the facts of the situation. Yeah. What was violated? How was it violated? How often was it violated? Who else was involved in the situation? When you talk about suspension, HR is not black and white. HR is so gray, and it's so many different levels that you really do have to step back and make sure that you're asking the right questions and checking your own automatic knee-jerk decision before you make a determination.
Yeah. I love that idea of just like pausing and make sure you are in the right space. You're not even thinking about the other person. You're thinking about yourself and how you're handling the situation. I think that's really smart. Chinwe, let's go over to you. So, before the suspension happens, what should HR professionals be thinking about doing, disciplining? What kind of tactics and things are they doing?
Okay. Just like what Debbie said, it's very important that HR is not biased, but also in ensuring that there is a communicated disciplinary or sanctions policy to everyone. So before anyone actually understands, and documentation of past behavior in order to lead to that suspension. So if that has been documented and that has been communicated, the individual understands, okay, this is ideally what's supposed to happen based on action A, action 2, action B, action C. So definitely an escalation matrix should be involved. However, I've seen situations even when leaders, and I'm talking team leads or supervisors, don't understand the sanctions policy, and immediately they run to suspension. And we need to avoid knee-jerk reactions in organizations, and HR has to be the voice of reasoning to bring back such, like I said, knee-jerk reactions and say, okay, this is this. If this hasn't communicated a verbal, a written warning, we shouldn't be moving to dismissal. But of course, there's some actions that will, that a dismissal or suspension will be effective immediately. So having that document.
Chinwe, I think we're losing you just a little bit.
I'll step in, Steve, if you don't mind. But I think the first step is what is going on, right? Somebody has to tell us, hey, this situation occurred, and we need, as HR professionals, to collect the information, right? So we need to collect witness statements. We need to conduct those witness statements. We need to just gather all of the information. And then, depending on what first comes at us, is this a safety issue? Is it, a workplace violence concern, reasonable suspicion, things like that? We have to first identify what issue is brought to us, then collect the facts, and we can go ahead and suspend and finish that process if it's something super egregious and we need to make sure that our staff in the building and everybody involved is safe. So I think, first of all, what's going on, and then second of all, we have to investigate. Like Debbie said, we have to be those investigators. We have to ask those tough questions and keep diving in until we can get all of the information.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, both Chinwe and Nicole. Let's talk more about what are the grounds typically for suspension? Because Nicole, you just brought up the word egregious behavior. You use the word violence, right? So I'm starting to paint this picture of these are some pretty bad things happening. So actually, yeah,
not necessarily, right? So you can suspend somebody pending an investigation, right? So it could be something as simple as stealing time, right? You're not clocking out. You're having somebody else clock out for you. The company wants to protect themselves and make sure that you don't take additional time. So maybe this was flagged to us by your manager, by the timekeeping department. So to be safe, we can just say, hey, Steve, we're going to go ahead and suspend you pending an investigation because it has been brought to our attention. Some issues with your time card. Is there anything you want to share with us while we finish our investigation and start, just gathering the rest of the information? And, if you don't have anything to say, or you're like, oh, I'm not sure what's going on, we can go ahead and just move forward with that. It really can just vary. Sometimes you need to place somebody on a suspension while they complete their random drug test because it went out as a potential positive, or a false negative, or however your company, drug testing company, communicates that with you. So there's a lot of different reasons, some super crazy ones to some pretty just everyday instances where you might just have to, it's easier to ask somebody to stay at home for a little bit than have them in the workplace.
Yeah. I love this list we're starting to gather here. I think people are starting to get an idea of when this might come into play. Debbie, I want to throw it over to you and let you share, what else should we add to this list of common situations where suspension might be wise?
Sometimes it's just to diffuse emotions. To Nicole's point, you need to sometimes remove the person from the situation so that you can actually be intentional with what you're doing, the questions you're asking, who you're bringing in to the fold in that investigation. Suspension doesn't necessarily mean guilt. And I think that that's important in the communication with the potential behavior that happened or the situation that happened. It truly is, we need to eliminate any potential fight or argument or whatever the case may be, right? I mean, it's to actually diffuse the situation, and it can be suspension with pay. You can bring them back with pay. There can be times where the investigation proves that the alleged offender really wasn't the offender. Yeah. So, suspension doesn't have to mean it's a negative thing. It means that something has happened and we have to take the appropriate amount of time and action to investigate, get to the purpose, get to the reason, get to the heart of it, in order for us to make a next decision, whatever that next decision is.
Yeah. And let's jump actually ahead to next decisions real quick. Because I have to believe that there are some situations where we'd skip suspension altogether and just fire them, right? If someone's I know you just brought up, guilt. Sometimes you suspend people because you're not sure if they're guilty yet. But in what situations would you just jump right ahead and say, you know what, you're not going to come back to the workforce. We don't kind of need this. We just have to say goodbye. Nicole, do you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, I've actually have had this happen to me in a couple of different situations. So the most common, right, if we have an individual that we believe, right, reasonable suspicion, we go through the process, they're acting, they're behaving a certain way, we've asked them those standard questions, maybe we smelt something on them, maybe they just are acting abnormal, whatever the case is. If the person is refusing to if you complete your drug test on site, if they're refusing to go forward with a drug test either on site or to leave to be tested, that's grounds for termination right there. You're admitting your guilt usually in those situations. Another time that you're going to move forward is any sort of workplace violence. If they say the words that they want to harm everybody in the building, they might have a weapon, they're being very aggressive. In my line of business, I have a field staff that goes into homeowners' houses to do repair work and to, build their new bathrooms. So if I have an installer who becomes aggressive with my customer in their home, using profanity, we will immediately move forward with separation. Again, they're representing the company. So we need to make sure that when our team is in somebody else's home, that they're respectful, they're polite, that homeowner does not fear for their safety. So yeah, again, it comes back to that safety aspect, right? Are the other people we're interacting with feeling safe? And a lot of companies too, I'm sure Debbie can speak to this, is you will have policies in place where if this happens, it's an automatic, termination. Some of your safety policies are pretty, significant. On the transportation side, if we had a report of a driver on their cell phone watching a movie, talking without using their handheld device, that was immediate grounds for termination because it was in violation of the Department of Transportation regulations that are out there for our CDL drivers. So there are some instances where it's just, unfortunately, no matter what you say, we're going to have to move forward with separation.
Yeah. I think you laid that out really clearly, Nicole. And I really appreciate all that. And I think now we've got sort of this range of we've listed a lot of things to do before suspension. We've listed some scenarios when you just want to jump past suspension to firing. And we've talked a little bit about some of the specific scenarios where suspension makes sense. So I wanted to start jumping in now all into suspension and get kind of the details out for everyone listening. And Chinwe, I know you've had some internet issues here, but I'd love if you could come in on this question. Let's talk about how long a suspension should last. What do you typically see? How do you determine the length? What are your thoughts on that, Chinwe? If your audio is working now.
Okay, can you hear me? Just to confirm, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, all right. So typically, in terms of the length of a suspension, this can vary across organizations, and typically it should last for not more than 2 weeks. And of course, you should be given with a timeline of when you're supposed to resume. Although that even with the timeline of resumption, you still have to set in the right conditions to remedy what the behavior was, and if the individual is committed to it. So ideally 2 weeks. It could be less based on the severity of the I wouldn't say crime, or rather the behavior of the action that led to the suspension. So ideally 2 weeks, but at least 1 week. Yeah.
Great thoughts there. Let's turn it over to everyone else too. What is your range, right? Upper limit, lower limit. how do you know where it fits there? Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen anything from the like 3 days up to a maximum of 2 weeks. That's a pretty long time.
Yeah.
I mean, if the infraction is so severe, why are you holding on to them for that long? So that'd be a great conversation to have if we had lots of time. But Chinwe, I'd love to understand that a little bit longer. I've just never seen it that long. We usually did 3 to 5 days, depending on the situation, depending on how many times that violation had occurred. And I actually would like to go back a question, and just to Nicole's point, we actually never, I don't want to say never, but we so rarely fired on the spot. We always did suspension pending investigation, because there was from a legal standpoint, you always, again, there's a protection that should happen, and the protection for the employee, protection for the company. But that also gives you an opportunity to decide, is this truly a terminable offense? You may have a 20-year employee who literally just did something stupid, who is not typically that way and maybe shouldn't be fired. Therefore, suspension would be good, right? I mean, yeah, it's going to be a black mark on their record. But I do think that suspensions, I think the time should fit the crime. I was always, as a global HR leader, I was very open to having discussions about what is the recommended time for this particular infraction, and to have a conversation, because it does impact that person. Typically, suspensions are not paid. At least that's been my situation. I mean, the whole point of a suspension is it's punitive, but it does hurt the team. It hurts the colleagues who have to kind of pick up the slack while that person is out. It hurts the supervisor. There's so many other layers that a suspension impacts. It's not just the person who did the violation. And that's, I think, where, when you look at suspending someone, what is that next step? Like it's not just about the time away from the office, but how do you help them not do that again? How do you help them see the error in what they did, how they did it? Ensuring that it's not a vacation for them. We were very cautious with how we handled our suspensions as well. So, I'm not going to give you a 5-day week. I'm not going to give you Thursday, Friday, and Monday off. I might give you a Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday off, like kind of sporadic. So so not even just looking at how long, but how do you want to, because again, it is punitive, right? You don't want this to be a time off vacation for the employee who did something wrong, and it's almost like a reward, because they're like, yeah, I don't have to work overtime. Yeah, I got 5 days off and I get to go and play with the family, right? That's not good either. So I think you have to take all of that into consideration as you're going through that process to go, what makes sense? How is this going to impact everyone, not just the person who's going on the suspension, and kind of just really think that through.
Yeah. Well, let's keep talking about it and give it over to Nicole here. It sounds like you already have some thoughts you want to share, but just throw some additional questions at you, just to highlight something that Debbie and Chin said. So, length, paid or unpaid, and what happens when somebody's out? Like, what other considerations do you have for that? 2 days, 2 weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I've never. I guess I should say rarely. If an investigation was escalated to my regional team, and given my environment where I worked in warehousing, so cross scheduling, just the timing it took to talk to everybody involved. Sometimes the investigations did last longer, but we communicated with the employee the entire time. Like, the investigation is still ongoing. We're still collecting information. So if we were past that, typical 3 to 5 day, we were in constant communication with that employee to let them know the status, because at that point they're anticipating I'm not coming back, and they're probably looking for another job. So so that they, if we weren't sure which way we were going to lean towards, if they were coming back or not, we wanted to make sure we had that communication, just because it's fair to both parties involved. And I think that when I talked about the suspension, termination surpassing the suspension, those were very safety specific reasons, or like I said, their reasonable suspicion, where it was clearly spelled out that if you don't agree to a drug testing, you're admitting guilt. So we are moving forward with termination. There were situations where they were paid. So, again, part of our protocol that I'm familiar with is if you are, anytime that we do a random drug test, if it has to be sent out for a medical review, you are suspended until those results come back. And that we would offer back pay. And again, that really fluctuates based, we can't control the lab process. So that is, it's an always paid time off, especially, once everything's been discussed and we get the negative test results back. So I think that, and again, to Debbie's point, it's not a vacation. So we're going to kind of inconvenience you as much as possible, so that you're still going to work your overtime. It's going to be in the middle of the week. You're not going to get like a nice long weekend. And same thing if you work with an organization where you have different schedules, right? Maybe you have people that work a Sunday through Wednesday shift, or so you just need to critique or manipulate their suspension as to what's going to make them not have like a long weekend or a vacation or anything that's going to be helpful to them.
Yeah. Right. Lots of more great points there. I think we covered well, what happens when they're gone. Maybe the one thing we haven't quite addressed yet is, how do you make sure team morale stays up and everyone else on the team is not affected by this person being gone? Debbie, you kind of brought that up. It can end up being a punishment for your internal team. Chinwe, I'd love to give you this one first. How do you think about this problem? How do you make sure the team is still feeling good even when you've taken one of their members and are suspending them?
In such an event, to avoid team morale from going down, sometimes it's best to address why, just like a parent, you address why you're punishing your kid. So you need to address it to the whole team, especially if the person works with a large number, a group of people whom they're very close to say, okay, this is why this person is being punished and this is the repercussions. And when you don't have a, like I said, a well-documented sanctions policy or communication or an SOP that says for so-and-so violations, this is what will happen. When you don't have that, the rest of the team members will just assume that you are working out of impulse, that you're being impulsive with your decision. So that communication, this is why this is happening, and this is, and then also putting someone in place, especially like a relief officer, to carry on that individual's duties, so that I know it will definitely leave a kind of, whoever is being the relief officer will also be afraid that if they default as well, the same repercussions will be handed over to them. But it's important that you communicate. If things aren't well,
just to finish your sentence there, it sounds like the communication is key, and you want to make sure you have a defined process so that when you go and communicate, you can say, hey, it's nothing personal about you or your team. This just happened. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again, kind of a thing. Awesome. Debbie, do you have any additional thoughts on this, on taking care of the team while one of their members is out?
Yeah, of course. We all have thoughts, right? So this is a little tricky situation. Sometimes the infraction is confidential and you're not at liberty to actually talk about the specifics. More often than not, whether managers like to know. Teams typically know a lot more than what we're allowed, as leaders or as HR or professionals. We're not at liberty to always talk about it, but being able to have a talking track is very important to answer any questions, and it could just be, we had a policy violation, Debbie's going to be out on this day, and this day. Here's what the plan of attack is. Chinwe, thank you for bringing up the relief person to be able to ensure that you've got appropriate coverage. Again, more often than not, the team is already aware of the situation because they are friends. They're going to be friends typically outside of work, whether they're texting or calling or whatever the case may be. There's also a level and a line, at least that I'm aware of, to ensure that the purpose of an investigation is confidentiality, and that protects everybody, so I'm not allowed to say that I spoke with Stephen and Debbie and Nicole and Chinwe and oh, by the way, Stephen's on suspension because he had this infraction and I'm going to be specific about it. It's more or less Stephen's on suspension for these days. We had an infraction to a policy, and here's how we're going to move forward. So I think it's always turning it to go forward in how we're going to overcome this, because people are overworked. They're overwhelmed. They're already working a lot of hours. And it's important to be able to focus on we're going to get through this together. Stephen will be back at work full-time on this day and this day, or however that's going to work. But I do think that communication is key for everybody involved, and allow people to ask questions, because I think that also builds trust and respect for HR, that HR is not just punitive, that we're not the bad people. We're not the cops. We're the ones who come in and go, let's look at this realistically, fairly. And when the track goes down and says, okay, we have a violation, we have to do something about that, then the communication turns to, we do follow our policies. We have these for a reason. They're not intended to be punitive. Unfortunately, sometimes that happens. So I think it's just really understanding the whole scope, and understanding the team that you're working with. Personalities matter. The shifts, Nicole, to your point, right? I mean, working weekends versus not weekends, third shift, second shift, first shift. There's different dynamics. Every organization has a culture, and every team has its subculture. So you also need to just kind of take all of that into consideration when you're doing that communication.
Yeah. We did have a comment from the audience I want to bring in real quick. And I think this is a little bit of reference to something we talked about before, but when in doubt, paid suspension pending the outcome of the investigation, then make that investigation timely and closed out. So I think we shared some of those thoughts. Appreciate that comment. And let's kind of jump into one of our final segments here now, which is around the return, right? So eventually the hope is this employee comes back, assuming the investigation went well or not. I mean, we'll talk about that in a second, but what does that look like? What does it look like bringing them back? Are you having you sitting them down in the room in the first day and you've got a plan written up for them? Like, hey, this happened. Now you got to do this or else X, Y, Z. Talk me through it, Nicole. What's going on here?
So to Debbie's point, it's a confidential matter that happened, right? So when we bring the employee back, we always make sure to have that conversation with them either prior to their return or on their first day. You were part of an investigation. It was confidential between you and I, what you've shared, what we discussed. We ask that you don't talk about it, to your team members out on the floor, let's put this all behind us. We make it very clear that we're moving forward. You're back. This is a brand new day, a brand new week. Let's not bring up the past. And then depending on the situation, sometimes it is applicable to write out a plan and make it very clear that if these behaviors or this action happens again, we're going to have to move forward with the next corrective action. That could be termination. Maybe you have coaching sessions set up for that person depending on what the behavior was, maybe touch points with HR or their direct manager. So you really tailor that communication. And if you want any follow-up, specific to that person, specific to what the offense was. And then you just really want to work on like a child, right? You don't want to keep saying you were bad, bad, bad. Okay, you did something that we had to correct you for. Now let's work together to make sure that we're improving upon that we're giving you the resources. So like Debbie said, we're here to help. We want to make sure that we are giving that person and that team everything they need to be successful. So if that's one-on-one coachings, if that's maybe we're adjusting their work schedule, maybe we're moving them to a new work schedule so they don't risk having that sort of interaction again with that team member or that team or whatever the case was. So we want to just let them have a fresh start and help them get to whatever that point looks like.
Yeah. I love this focus on being forward facing or, looking to the future.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie, I see you unmuting yourself, and Chinwe as well. I'll let you speak real quick, Debbie, and then we'll go to Chinwe.
Yeah, Chinwe, go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Little some breakup there. You want to give it one more shot and then we'll hop over to Debbie? Okay, go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have learned after being in corporate America for 30 years is that we often focus on the offender, but not on the leadership. Typically when you're looking at suspension, and I think the group that we're talking to here is, we're talking about your entry level type folks, that to me, it's also very important to follow up with their supervisor, with their lead, ensuring that they know how to lead them forward. How do they put maybe their bias? Because it may have been an infraction toward leadership, right? So like, how do you not get angry at that person now? If you were friends and this leader got promoted, I think that the development and the communication needs to go beyond just the returning employee, that this is a great opportunity for leadership development to occur, and even laying out a plan of how do you build that bridge of trust and respect between the leader and the offender, and or even within the team. Like, is there something else that you can go even beyond that? Oftentimes in my past, what I've seen is that we take the offender, they're on their vacation, because that's kind of what they call it. But then we literally throw them straight back in there, but we don't focus on what new behaviors do we want to see? How does that supervisor hold them accountable, right? Accountability is huge. And really, really building that relationship back to where it can be, and possibly even beyond that, if we actually take the time to focus on that. So I just want to throw that out there as a little caveat, that it's not just about the person on the suspension coming back, but what a great opportunity to use as a learning and development opportunity for the leader, for the lead, for the manager or supervisor, or whatever the case may be. So,
yeah, I think that's awesome. Don't put all the weight on them to change the environment too that's around them.
Mm-hmm.
And that can encourage that behavior as well. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, and I was just going to say something just to circle back around there. I think we are, like Debbie said, all talking about those frontline entry-level workers, right? But if you do run into a situation where you are suspending a leader of some sort, is obviously our frontline workers are, like Debbie said, are calling or texting or know everything that's going on in the situation much more than what's being, discussed with HR. So we're always getting less information than everybody else is. But as much as our conversations are confidential and we don't ever want to go out and address that Nicole did this and she's being corrected and this is how long she's going to be corrected for. When a senior leader or their direct supervisor or somebody like that's involved, I think it's a great opportunity for HR and operations to come together and just get a pulse on the team right away, right? How's everybody doing? How do you feel? Yes, that your leader's going to be out for a few days. What can we do to help you? This is who's going to be in place. And just making sure that the respect is still there until the decision's made. So I think when we talk about explaining what's happening, I think that's a really good opportunity for us to come together and try to address that the most appropriate way. And less is more. You don't need to tell them what the infraction is. Though, again, they will know most of the time or have an idea. So it's really just redirecting and making sure that they understand that, again, we're here to support them. We want to make sure they're comfortable. What can we do for you? That redirects the what really happened and what occurred. And we're telling them that we still value them and we want to make sure that we're giving them everything they need. And they usually that usually helps limit the conversations and the talking about what could be going on and is this person going to be fired or what's going to happen when they come back. So,
yeah.
And just a real quick comment. So Nicole, thank you for bringing that up. It's the gossip that happens before, during, and after, right? And trying to get a handle on that gossip to stop, because we're gonna make up our own stories when we don't know what's going on. So communication is key, but also just bringing up the fact of, you're not going to have all the facts of this. Don't make up your own story just to please yourself, and don't talk behind this person's back, because all that's going to do is breed disrespect and other negative emotions. So I do think that's a great point, Nicole, is that team conversation of, if you have questions, come and talk to me confidentially. But don't just assume you know anything or everything that's going on, because as much as they do know, they don't know 100%. There's always that little bit that is just not quite there, and they're going to fill in that gap, and then that just breeds division within the team and or the leader.
Yeah, and I think another good point is that make your comments to whoever you're talking to the same. So if you get the same question, respond the same exact way. Don't let your friendship or your personal feelings of that, whoever you're speaking to about that person, change how your response is. So you want to keep it very factual. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to work through this. But you really want to keep it exact. Like if whatever I'm saying to Debbie for her question is the same that I'm saying to Chenwa and to Steve, you don't want to vary that, because then they will see that division and they'll know how to, if I ask Debbie something, she'll give me a little bit more than what Nicole gave me. So united front is what you need to have when you work in HR.
Well, great. We got lots of good advice here. That was our last major segment and topic for discussion, but we've moved all the way from the decision to suspend through the period of time of the suspension itself and through bringing people back. Lots of great insights. We always like to give everyone, though, at the end of each of these conversations, one last opportunity to basically in a sentence or two share what their best piece of advice is in general for somebody who is approaching this process for the first time. And I think we've already mentioned maybe a few of these things, but Chinwe, I'd love to give you, the first crack at this. What is your sort of parting wisdom for anyone who's dealing with employee suspensions? If you're there and have the audio.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so it's important that for an HR professional, you do need to have a tough skin. It's going to put you in a difficult position where you are making such a harsh decision to a team member and still have to come around to find a way to remedy the behavior. So definitely knowing that what you're doing is definitely enforcing a certain kind of behavior you want in the business, but also ensuring that you're putting in the right corrective actions in place so that this individual can be reinstituted back into the organization. So it's something that we all have to go through, but having the tough skin and the understanding that is important. Yes.
Love it. Tough skin. Nicole, let's hop to you next, and then Debbie will give you the last word.
It's not personal. It's your job, and you have to go in it just factual, like it's a true investigation. Write down everything that's being said. Ask lots of questions. Don't put your 2 cents or thoughts or feelings in it. Just okay, thank you. Let me ask you some more questions. This is one time in HR where you have to be black and white.
Yeah. Perfect. Debbie, over to you.
I think Nicole's daughter or son just had the last word. I loved it.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
The pause is really important, because sometimes when you're faced with something that is difficult, because this is a tough conversation to have, it really is good to pause, check your own biases, and then always be consistent. So regardless of the situation, following that process, to Chinwe's point of having a true standard operating procedure on how HR actually handles this, although the situations are different and the people are different and personalities matter, the consistency is where HR gets the greatest respect, when they see that you are not picking and choosing who you like or don't like, and that you're coming at this from that same place.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. Lots of great advice here. If you still have something else you want to learn about employee suspension, we always show this at the end of these conversations. Hop into our HR encyclopedia. That's where this video will be posted at our employee suspension, at the top of our employee suspension article. And of course, go ahead and meet these panelists. Find them on LinkedIn. They're great people. I know Chinwe has a lot more she wants to say on the subject, and the technical difficulties didn't, not everything worked out perfectly this time, but these 3 people are awesome, and so glad that you came. We hope that everyone has an amazing rest of their day, and we hope we see you again sometime soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.